Hey guys, it's Lieutenant Colonel Killzone here, coming at you with a Cavalry Lance tips video. It took me a while to love the Lance, but now I can't put the thing down. In fact, I just became the first person to reach 100 service stars with it. And so I figured I'd make a little tips video to kind of share the things that I've learned over the course of that time, and some of the things I wish I had known when I was using it at the first. So the first thing I'll say is I'm not actually going to spend a lot of time with the basics here. There's a lot of really great videos out there already that talk about what weapons you have as cavalry, what you can do, what you can't do. You should definitely take a look at those. But for the most part, if you want to learn, I'll go over some simple things that I wish I'd known earlier. But the best advice I can give if you're new or if you're just trying to learn how to not crash the horse or not get it stuck is to just find an empty server. In the server browser, you can filter for servers that are empty or have, all slots available. And you can just kind of play around. I found Foul Fortress really good for practicing on because there's a lot of places to kind of get potentially snagged up, and you get a real good sense of how the horse actually negotiates different kinds of obstacles by running around here for a while. So one thing that took me a while to figure out is the side of the horse that you dismount on. So it's dependent on the direction of your reticule relative to the center of your horse. So if you drop a med pack on your right always, as you always do, and you want to get that med pack as quickly as possible, what you want to do is turn your reticule to the right side of the horse so that when you dismount, you'll fall right on top of it. Likewise, if for whatever reason you need to dismount on your left, you point your reticule to the left side of the horse. A second thing that took me a while to realize is you can actually use as much rifle ammo as you want because it replenishes automatically. It replenishes 5 rounds at a time once you fire a full round of 5 clips. It takes not even that long, maybe like 5 to 7 seconds. Same thing applies for your grenades. Your grenades replenish every 13-ish seconds or so once you throw the second grenade. So never walk around with only one grenade in your hand, otherwise they won't replenish. And what I like to do is kind of count out in my head according to the gallops of the horse. So I count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and it roughly matches the pattern of your horse hitting the ground. All right, enough about the basics. Let's get to what you actually came here for, which is the lance itself. So the lance is a completely different beast from the sword. A completely different hitbox, longer hitbox, slower time to strike. So there are some trade-offs that are associated with that. And I think the thing that people struggle with the most is the lance timing, so I'm going to start with that. Striking with the lance requires you to kind of time it in a way that's not really intuitive. You're actually really far back when you end up hitting your target if you're doing it right. And so let's take a look at that again. Basically, I'm so far back, I'm like a few paces behind. And I think getting used to that takes some time. I mean, for me, I had to practice striking a lot earlier than I was used to, and then I had to go back and try even earlier than that. It's that far away. But here's what's nice about the lance is that the hitbox stays active so much longer than the sword does. So you end up with a little bit of wiggle room. What that means is even if you strike too early, you still have a second or moment or so to adjust as they try to move and get away. So what I've been telling people is essentially don't try to hit people with the force of the jab. Strike early enough that you're killing them with the already extended tip of the spear. And I find that helps mentally think about what the right timing is for the lance. I mean, the hitbox just stays active so long, which is one of the reasons I really do like the lance over the sword. All right, the second thing I'll say is to consider switching to your non-default camera view when you're striking. Not all the time. I actually just switch immediately when I know I'm going to engage an enemy, and then I switch right back to the default camera view. And I don't do it all the time. I do it maybe 70% of the time. And the reason is because if you are in fact the right distance away from the enemy to get the timing right, if you're in your default camera view, your view of the target is obscured by the horse and rider. So take a look at these two clips. I'm going to kill both enemies, but on the left I'm using the default camera view. On the right I'm using the non-default camera view. And if you compare the two, the only reason I'm seeing the guy on the left is because he's going uphill from me. If the guy on the left were on level ground like the guy on the right is, I wouldn't even be able to see him. And that ends up being critical when you're trying to track your target and actually land the strike. And you can see in this clip that I do have the default camera view. I do end up killing him, but look how obscured that guy is. I really just get lucky in that kill. I mean, if he were to move at all, I just wouldn't really have been able to see where he was going to go. Not as easily as if I had my other camera view on and approached him that way. I think the next thing I would say is after striking over your left shoulder, get used to striking blind with the lance because your timing is so delayed. So generally, I just kind of, if I ever notice an enemy, I start to prepare the lance. Watch how far away this guy is. Even if I just kind of know roughly where he's at, I pull the trigger really early, and I know I'm going to get that kill. It's one of the things that's satisfying with the lance, honestly, is that you can get these places you'd never ever reach with a sword just by knowing where the enemy's at. It, again, requires you to get used to just pulling the trigger before you even see the enemy. Before they come up with that hill, before you even really notice them. So maybe that's the thing with the lance, is that it kind of forces you to be a smart and attentive player. Just hearing things, like I heard that flame trooper, when I start to hear the hooves of a horse and I kind of know that he's going to be around the corner somewhere, I just start to strike early. So that's often the case where I just happen to know where to expect somebody. And I just anticipate where they are going to go and where they're going to be and aim there with the lance early enough that they run right into it. And that might be one way to talk about the trade-off of the lance, is it can get places that the sword can't, but it kind of forces you to be an intelligent player with strong situational awareness. Here's a guy I'm going to hit with a couple grenades. He's not going to die immediately. I don't see my enemy kill or my teammate kill him, and he's not anywhere up around those ledges, so I know based on his foot running he's got to be only in one place. And it's so satisfying to get those kills, honestly. I think that's the trade-off, is you can do things with a sword that you can do things with a lance that you would never end up doing with the sword, and it's just by far much more satisfying. Speaking of satisfying, I'll say this about the lance charge. I do love it, but I only really use it in situations where I know I'm going to connect with a target, which is almost never, really. I use it when a target's oblivious or is a sniper camping somewhere. It's actually very rare. I find that the real use of the lance is getting in places that you'd never really expect, and the sword couldn't. So, like, this guy, I can't get behind the gate. There's a guy who can't get, people who can't get behind walls or trying to run behind cover. The lance will get them, whereas the sword won't. And so I kind of say that the lance is quirky, but it's predictable. And I say that because I think another thing people struggle with is the hitbox doesn't always match the animation. So I say just to get used to the hitbox itself, but don't expect the animation to match it. So here, even when I jump, the lance doesn't really kind of come out. It clearly does not connect with that guy, but I get him anyway. You'll find this time and time again. You'll trigger the lance, you'll get the kill, especially when jumping, but the animation doesn't ever really strike the enemy. I think what I've come to, the way I've kind of treated it is, if I know I'm going to jump, I just trigger the lance as if I'm going to get the right timing anyway, and end up getting the kill. I end up using this all the time to get these really quirky kind of kills that, again, the lance can get, but the sword might not ever have gotten that. I mean, it is absurd sometimes, like this guy trying to get up the ladder. The hitbox, it just ends up being so tall as well. I mean, honestly, here's a dude trying to climb up the wall to get from me, and it's just bizarre. I mean, that lance got nowhere near his actual body, but I got the kill anyway. All right, so what I want to talk about now is about kind of using your positioning and the positioning of enemies to your advantage. Because the lance requires such specific timing, your goal is really to pick the battles that you know you can win, and it's even better if you can get your enemies into the right place to begin with. And so all of this is about guiding enemies to where you want them to be. There's a few specific ways I do that. The first I think of is kind of controlling the height perspective, or taking advantage of the difference in perspective from the horse, where you're in third person and looking down from above, against infantry, which is really starkly different. I use that to my advantage all the time, especially in sand dune kind of areas where this guy can see me here. I go over the dune where he now has to move out of his way because he just literally can't see me, but he knows he has to do something. So things like this, where a guy down there, he sees me, I go away from him for a second, but he just shot at me. So I know he's kind of committed to killing me. At least I want to come around here, check. So I look at him, he's still there. He can't see that I'm over the wall. So what I'm going to do is just wait until he comes over. and then when he's out of position, I can go stab him. And again, this is just because from my perspective, I know that I can see him, but he can't see me as clearly, so I'm just waiting to see what move he makes, and I use the walls to that advantage all the time. Alright, so the next thing is about splitting up enemies who are in groups and getting them to go where you want them to go. This is kind of built on the idea that as cavalry, you don't really want to engage more than 2 people who are actively looking at you. One-on-ones you can easily do, 2 people paying attention, it's a little trickier, but you can do it. 3 people looking at you or more and actively trying to kill you, you're going to have a bad time with that. So essentially what you want to do with squads is kind of use the timing to your advantage to pull them away from each other. So here's a guy I end up kind of missing with like a dummy, but I see his friend back here. I come over and I'm like, oh shit, he brought his whole squad, didn't he? So what do I do in this scenario? The idea is to kind of just stay in the background long enough to kind of get them thirsty for blood. The thing is, it's really kind of hard for people to stay coordinated over a period of time on one task, like trying to kill a horse. Eventually, 1 or 2 of them inevitably splits off. You get into yourself into little one-on-ones. This guy got bored. He's trying to get back to the base before I get to him. He thinks he can, and he doesn't. Here's the guy I originally missed, who's paying attention to something else now. He forgot I even existed, for all I can tell. And at this point, now I can finally come back and get this guy. So again, kind of the point is, it's difficult for people to maintain focus on you, even in large squads. Even if they're kind of talking to each other, I find that people over time just kind of lose the ability to track what's going on, and they end up making a dumb mistake. Here's 2 guys who probably coordinating with each other, honestly, because they're out here alone, or on a team. But if I just kind of stick back long enough, get them thirsty, get them wanting to get up on me, that guy makes a mistake and gets himself killed, and then it's just a one-on-one. I do this especially with people with short-range weapons who kind of have no choice but to run up on you, or just run around in the desert all alone like an asshole. But this guy overcommits. He can't now back up over that hill. He's too far away from it. Overcommitting is generally how I think about it. So here's a few guys in a squad. I didn't like what I saw there. So I know, though, that everybody wants to kind of hug this curve right here next to the wall. So if I just wait a little bit, put a grenade or 2 exactly where I know they're going to be, this guy can't avoid it. Now it's a one-on-one there. I just check over my shoulder just to make sure those other guys actually did go inside the castle. And now that's an easy kill. So again, just kind of splitting up and making people overcommit goes a long way towards getting people to go where you want them to go. All right, the third thing I'll say about getting people to go where you want them is to kind of stalk them like a tiger, basically, like make these wide curves. So here's a guy who I could potentially charge straight at, but I know he's next to a wall. So what I do is kind of create this really wide arc instead. What it ends up doing is subtly pulling him away from that wall, just enough that if he wanted to go back and try to get to cover, he's too far away by that point. I do this all the time, kind of circling around. Also, it's just kind of easier to get in good position to throw your grenades, to spot people. Which, yeah, I didn't mention that earlier, but you should be spotting people all the time. It's one of the most important ways you can support the team. All right, I think the next thing I'll say is to never go into combat without 2 grenades in your hand. This also kind of comes from the idea that engaging multiple enemies just generally isn't that great of an idea. So what you want to do is, even if you don't even plan on using your grenades offensively, is just have them in your back pocket as a safety net. There will be times where I just actively do not engage because I don't have my grenades in hand, just because I know there's so many situations that I wish that if I do happen to run into another enemy or 2, having the grenades, even just to distract one of them, goes a long way towards having the focus to really get the target that I was going after. So I kind of think of it as splitting up enemies with grenades as well. So here's a guy who would have just distracted me with suppressive fire, but being able to have those grenades in my hand goes a long way towards letting me focus on the people I'm really trying to get. So one of the things I love doing is going up behind and getting stationary weapons, people on artillery. This guy, he ended up moving though, so luckily I had those 2 grenades to get his buddy, and I was still able to focus on him while he moved. It does often beg the question, well, I got 2 enemies, which one do I throw the grenades at, and which one do I use the lance on? My rule of thumb is the person who is stationary or less mobile is the one you throw the grenades at, because the other guy you can track and hit with the lance a little bit more easily. So throw the grenades at the person on the ground, hit the lance to the guy who's standing up and moving around. The other reason I'll say always have grenades in your hand is because they're such a good defensive tool. This is overlooked so much that when you're trying to escape a battle, using grenades to distract the enemy or just put a little pressure on them goes such a long way towards surviving. You have to get a kill from it as well, as I did there, but here's a scenario in which I missed my target. The guy's going to keep shooting at me, but I forced him to move out of position and let me run over this hill, right? I end up doing this a lot where, here I'm taking a lot of hits. I'm down to, 12 life on my horse, so anybody who comes around that corner, like this guy, really has an actual good shot of killing me. So what I have to do is toss a few grenades back to put even just a little bit of pressure on him. And again, if you end up doing it enough, you end up finding you get your kill sometimes doing that. And you'd be surprised, even the little bit of smoke that comes up as the grenades explode, that's been the difference between life and death for me when I throw grenades back, and it just obscures their view just enough to let me get away. All right, and then the last topic, thinking about grenades, is you'll notice I haven't used my rifle at all. I use my rifle after I throw my grenades. I know some players use the rifle primarily. I don't do it. It's kind of like a cleanup weapon for me, where I know I'm going to throw grenades at those guys, so I already pulled out my rifle, and I just use it to sweep up anybody I missed back there. I find that really this seems to be the best use of the rifle, at least for my game style. If you treat it as a cleanup weapon, your enemies are always at the right distance. Your enemies are a little panicked. They're trying to figure out where to go, where you were at. It lets you kind of focus on them for a second. It's great when you don't end up, making your lance strike. So here I missed like a dummy. Wow, that was really early. But I did hit it with a grenade, so all I got to do is pull out my rifle, just move a little bit away. And don't get me wrong, I use my melee weapon 99% of the time, as opposed to the rifle. But there are times where I kind of see an approach is just not going to be great. So here's some fences in the way, and the timing of the jumps might not be great because, as you might know, the horse can only really jump multiple times in a row after a little bit of a cooldown. So I use the rifle grenade combination instead. All right, I'll say a couple things about surviving. Basically, you'll get used to running blind, just like you'll get used to striking blind. So here's a dude who I ended up missing, and he got me pretty close to dead with just his pistol. So what I have to do is just I look at him as I'm going away, knowing that this hill is not going to block me. So you can see here what I'm actually doing is moving just enough so that he has to get out of his position, and I know this tree is going to block him in each case. So paying attention to where he's at rather than where I'm running was the trick there. And of course, you have to know the map well enough, but in that case, I knew the hill wasn't going to let me do anything. So that's actually what was happening here, too. I don't know if you noticed, but I know that there's trees there, so I used those to obscure this guy's view a little bit. The fact that I threw grenades back and happened to kill him was a bonus, but really the trees were the trick to surviving there. I mean, I'll also say this about survival is you're not attacking all the time as cavalry if you're doing your job right. In many cases, you're a distraction and you're supporting your team. I mean, you're just such a huge visual target. So here I know a couple guys are trailing behind me. All I do is just run through here long enough to see if an enemy's going to shoot at me, and I pull away. The guys behind me now know where the enemy's at, and they were able to capture Bravo there. I mean, honestly, your goal as cavalry is most of the time you're supporting your team with spotting, you're dropping ammo and med constantly, you're tossing grenades into the fray. Maybe you're not going to kill somebody, but you're going to pull people out enough that your teammates can come in and get the win. I can't stress enough that surviving and winning with the horse is mostly running around spotting, every once in a while coming in to get your kill, but staying at a safe enough distance that you can just choose the right time that you can go in and picking your right battles. All right, guys, so that's it for now. I've got a lot I want to say about using the horse against elites, against other cavalry members, against vehicles. So I've got another video coming out for that if that's something that people are interested in. But what else did I miss? Do you guys play with the cavalry differently? Do you actually use the rifle primarily? I'd love to know that, see how you use it. Let me know. But other than that, that's good for now. Stay tuned for something in the future about getting some of these heavier targets. In the meantime, if you have any questions, I'll answer them here. I'm on the Battlefield Reddit often, so you can comment there. I can kind of throw out some other tips that I may have left out. But other than that, good writing out there, guys, and Godspeed, fellow writers.
Yeah! Lost it now.